Hey there guys, and welcome to this episode of Gearist TV. Today we're going to be taking a look at the EVERlong trail running shoe from Patagonia. So it's kind of easy to stereotype different types of athletes. You know, you have your triathletes who, if they could pay $400 a square for carbon fiber toilet paper just to be sure that they could get out of the bathroom quicker, they would. Runners, on the other hand, tend to be a little more budget conscious. And I say this as someone who's been both an exclusive runner and a triathlete. So keep that in mind. For those runners that want a lot of bang for their buck, which is pretty much everybody across the board, finding a shoe that's going to allow them to kind of indulge their whims no matter the platform, no matter where they want to run, is something that's really desirable. They want a shoe that's going to be able to take them off-road, that's going to be able to go on the road or run on the road to the trailhead or something like that. So finding a shoe that does all those things is really, really tricky. And that's where this shoe comes in. The Patagonia EVERlong is really a trail-specific shoe, as Patagonia calls it, but it is just as comfortable at home on the pavement. So let's get into talking about it. So first up, as always, let's talk about the outsole of the shoe. Right up here in the forefoot, midfoot region, you can see that it kind of looks like a network schematic, and we'll get to talking about that a little bit in a minute. But first, let's talk about the pods or the lugs that are here. These are the lugs or pods that we're going to be talking about. Now what's great about these are about 2 millimeters deep, and we're going to get into this as it pertains to road and trail, so bear with me. What you can see is that these are a high density carbon rubber that's really going to be very durable. One of the things that I like about this is that where a lot of companies, and we've talked about this several times before, have gone with trying to predict where the foot is going to fall and then only putting rubber in that area. For instance, some shoes might put them simply here on the lateral forefoot and then on the medial forefoot, but negating the lateral forefoot altogether, leaving this open to durability issues. What they've done is they've made these pods full foot. Now, of course, that makes sense for a trail shoe because you want it to be a little more durable. At about 2 millimeters deep, these are certainly not a cleated shoe, so it's not going to handle technical trail and super loose and steep stuff the way that a more technical cleated shoe would, but it still does a fantastic job. Part of that, I feel like, is you can see this yellow crisscross pattern under here. Now, what's cool about this is that it gives a lot of snapback. So when the shoe gives flex in any direction, like this, especially in the forefoot, which obviously that's where these snapback areas take place, what's great is that it really snaps back and you have this almost like rubber band effect that really pulls that shoe back to shape. But what it does is it allows the foot to flex over things but still give it that really strong kind of structural shape. Really nice way to go. Now, additionally, it's laid over top of the orange that you can see here. That is just EVA from the midsole, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Now, when it comes to the can you fold the shoe in half test, you can fold the shoe in half. Certainly, it does a great job. These cut a tiny bit of the flexibility that you might otherwise want, but keep in mind, as I mentioned, that rubber band-like effect, this really shapes itself around whatever terrain you're on, whether it's a rock or something like that. It shapes yourself around that nicely and allows it to pop back. Yes, it may be a hair, just a smidge of sacrifice on the flexibility this way, but seriously not a ton. I mean, it's barely noticeable, so not a big deal. Now, the other thing that I mentioned at the top of this is that this thing handles well on road. If you look at that tread pattern, if you look at it from the side, it doesn't. It looks very similar to something like a Kinvara. You've got a nice full foot feel, full contact front to back. There's no dip out for the arch right here, or cutaway rather. And it's going to feel like a road shoe. If somebody handed this to me and they were like, hey, this is this road shoe from Patagonia, it would not surprise me at all. It would feel and ride and run like a road shoe. Now, we're going to get into that more in the ride section, but just from an outsole perspective, it's very similar to a road shoe, and this is part of why it handles so well on roads as well as trail. Now, the midsole of the EVERlong is pretty traditional. It's EVA foam. It's got a 4 millimeter drop, so it's got a 24 millimeter stack height in the heel and 20 millimeter stack height in the forefoot. For a trail-specific shoe, which again is what Patagonia refers to it as, this is a nice weight, and a men's size 9, this is a size 11, but a men's size 9 is right around 8.4 ounces. Really nicely weighted for a trail shoe. Now, the midsole of this shoe is pretty cushy. Now, one of the things that allows for is the absence of a really stiff rock plate, because the cushiness of the midsole is going to suck up a lot of the kind of terrain, the hard and sharp things that you might otherwise be missing. Now, while I personally prefer quite a firm ride, this has a nice aspect going for it that allows kind of the best of both worlds. And what that is, if we remove the sock liner, is a nice, really stiff, firm Strobel board, that's this part right under here that lies underneath the sock liner. It's pretty firm, and what's great about that is that if you choose to run in this shoe without a sock liner, which I do quite a bit, or with a sock liner, you're going to be able to have still a very firm surface to push off of. We've talked about this in some shoes in the past where the outsole and midsole areas are meant to provide a lot of cushioning, and the way they combat that saggy feeling where you feel like you're sinking into the shoe is by putting a firm Strobel board or firm base plate on top of it that's going to allow you to really get a firm push-off surface and not let the foot sag into that. So that's a really nice aspect of this that keeps the ride pretty peppy. Now the upper on the EVERlong is a really interesting one because it's using a very kind of almost a web-like, you can see here on both sides around the heel counter, it's using a web-like system of welded overlays. Now what's great about this is that, as we've touched on in the past, it adds really sleek lines, it keeps the weight down and all that kind of stuff. It also makes for a really well locked down shoe for something that ideally is going to be used on a trail and when you need a little bit of agility and kind of mobility and things like that. These things really strap the foot down well. Being that, as you can see here, they're attached into all these lacing points, what that's going to do is when you tighten it up, just as it is in most other shoes, but in this case they're using these overlays, when you tighten that up, it's really going to grab the foot and kind of surround it with this support structure. Now, there's no real heel counter per se, it's kind of just not there. There is a little bit of the midsole that comes up alongside the back side of the heel, but all that's effectively doing is kind of building out a heel cup shape. The heel counter itself is not really there because you can see it's been replaced by basically webbing those overlays that form the same shape that a heel counter would be in if there were a rigid heel counter inside. In terms of toe protection, there's not a lot going on there. All it is simply a place where the outsole of the toe rolls up right kind of smack dab in the center there. Now, while this is great, and if you kick something, this is certainly going to take care of you, it's not super beefy, so if you tend to be really clumsy and kick a lot of things, it may be a little less protective than you want it to. Not a deal breaker, it's just something to point out. Now, as I've talked about in the past, I tend to be a stickler for how much foam is in the collar and tongue area of shoes because people tend to either make it really, really thin or overstuff it for no reason. In this case, they've done a really nice job. There's just enough foam both on the tongue and around the collar. One of the cool things is that on either side of the Achilles, you can see these kind of little patty sections right there. What those are going to do is fit in on either side of the Achilles nice and gently, and it's not so much going to provide a whole lot of stability, but what it's going to do is make you feel as though the foot is nice and locked in there. And it is nice and locked in there by the strapping and all that, but that gives you that extra sense of security. Now for the tongue and collar area, what they've chosen to use is Dry-Lex, a wicking material that obviously, since this is the majority of where you're going to have that sweat going on, because all this is such open mesh, this is going to really wick that moisture away and keep your foot nice and comfortable. Now, one thing that I didn't mention is that this is a seamless upper. You can see here, I'll hold the laces over to the side, there are no seams on that. There may be stitching behind the foxing right here, but in general, there's no stitching on the upper at all. Internally, it's backed by a much more fine mesh that's going to keep debris if you choose to run barefoot in this. It's going to keep, or sockless rather. The outer mesh is going to keep the most debris out, right? But if you want those little fine particles to still stay out, the inner mesh backing is also going to add another layer of that. Now the tongue is not gusseted. Now, one of the things that is, again, another pet peeve of mine that I have also talked about in the past is that the tongue slips a little bit. It tends to slide laterally on me, not a ton, and it's wide enough that, as you can see, that even if it slips, so here's the tongue kind of tie down right here, even if it slips all the way laterally, the laces are still backing over the tongue, so it's not something where you're going to feel laces all of a sudden dead on top of your foot. But maybe I feel like if it were gusseted about halfway up or so, it would help to hold that tongue in place a little bit better. Now, one of the things in terms of the upper build that I find very interesting, and I'm not quite sure why it's like it is the way that the toe box at the tip is shaped. We're going to talk about this a little more in the fit, but you can see how it kind of tapers to a point like that. Now, this is the Patagonia EVERmore, and you can see they know what they're doing when it comes to anatomical shoe building and foot shape building. So I don't know why this shape right here hasn't made its way into this. Not a big thing. There's still plenty of room. As you can see, it's a nice wide base and a nice wide upper through the large majority of the toe box. It's just kind of like the last inch or so where I feel like it could have a little more wide wide roundness on the lateral side there. For me, the sizing in this shoe was right on. I wear an 11 and this is an 11. It works perfectly well. In terms of fit, it does a great job. I really do think that this strapping system does a nice job of really holding the foot down nicely, and you don't miss the traditional heel counter at all. It holds through the midfoot, and even the toe box in the forefoot is really, really nice. Looking past just this little bit of this last couple inch or inch and a half right here of the toe box, it's really nice. And even down here, there's room for the foot to splay. I just still would like to see a little more roundness on the lateral side of the toe box there. Now let's talk about the ride. As I've mentioned a couple times before, this midsole is a little cushy. Now, on a trail, it has an interesting effect because of that covering by a firm strobel board. Now, what's great about it is that it's going to protect your foot from a lot of the really sharp stuff that you might feel. But at the same time, that strobel board isn't going to allow you to, again, feel that sinking feeling. So that's a really nice addition to the shoe. On basically any kind of trail terrain, this does a great job. Now, the fact that it's not a really cleated shoe per se with longer lugs, it doesn't really affect you. The times where I did notice it were on steep uphills or downhills or more loose terrain, especially on ascents where I wasn't quite getting the traction that I might want to, ascents where it was loose stuff. That may be a spot where you're going to miss that a little bit, but again, you can still dig in. This is still going to be a great trail shoe. Now, when you get off the trail and onto the road, it does a nice job. It really does a nice job. And, you know, it is a little cushy for my taste on the road. I would like to feel it a little more firm. That strobel board does help, but that foam is still a tiny bit cushy. But a lot of people are really going to like that because they're looking for more cushioning in a lightweight shoe. And again, at 8.4 ounces for a trail-specific shoe that can also handle roads with plenty of aplomb, this is going to be a nice option. So the EVERlong is priced at $110, which, coming from Patagonia, a brand which tends to be on the way high end of the price spectrum when it comes especially to apparel, $110 is nice. It puts you right at the lower end of the premium running shoe market, not super overpriced, and for a shoe that's going to be able to take you on and off-road whenever you want to, that's a really great deal. Its weight and traction give a lot of potential for speedy trail runs, and it's got a nice 4mm drop that's not going to scare away minimalist purists or low drop runners, but it's also going to be really accessible to people that are maybe thinking about coming from a traditional running shoe into something with a lower drop. With its super wide base, excellent construction as we would expect from Patagonia, this is going to be a shoe that a lot of people should take a look at. You may not think about Patagonia typically for running shoes, especially not for something that may be at home on the road, but this is definitely an option to consider. So be sure to try some of these on if you have a chance. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Let's get into the stars now. First up is construction. We're going to give it 5 stars. It's a really well built product that's really well thought out and really well put together for a wide variety of feet with this strapping system. For durability, we're going to give it 4.5 stars. Now, the only things that may have taken that half star away is a little bit of a wider toe bumper would have been nice, because if you kick this side enough, it might wear through, but we didn't have any issues. As you can see, it's still in one piece there. And a little bit of this EVA may break down a little bit quickly, but again, because you're going to still have contact mostly with these lugs, not an issue at all. Comfort is going to be 4 stars. Super comfortable shoe, a little cushy for my taste, which makes me a tiny bit uncomfortable on the road, and a little bit of this tiny narrowish tip of the toe box thing that's going on may have taken that 1 star away there. Fit, 3.5 stars. Now, the interesting thing about this is that I think the entire shoe fits well. This part bugs me. I don't quite understand why this little point happens up here. Again, it's not a huge deal, and some people's feet may fit perfectly into this, but for me, it didn't allow my toes to splay and spread as much as I might like it. Not a big deal. Definitely try it on and make sure it fits your foot. Don't just take my word for it. Weight, we're going to give it 4 stars. At 8.4 ounces, this is light for a trail-specific shoe, which again, they do call this a trail-specific shoe. And finally, for performance, we're also going to give it 4 stars. It does a really nice job. I think, though, that for a trail-specific shoe, if we're taking the road element out of it, you're going to want to have a slightly deeper cleat, something a little more aggressive that's going to allow it to perform a little better on some more technical trails. However, that being said, I felt that if you look at this as a more hybrid shoe and had it been labeled as that, this would have a higher rating in performance because, again, it can perform on both road and trail. Now that gives an overall star rating of 4.2 stars. So are you someone who looks for a trail road hybrid shoe, or do you prefer individual shoes for each of those pursuits? Let us know in the questions and comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Gearist TV. Don't forget to like and favorite this video and subscribe to our channel. Also, please find us on social media. That's facebook.com/thegearist, Instagram @thegearist, Twitter @thegearist, Google+, Gearist rocks. Check it all out, and as always, click on over to Gearist.com. Let us know what you think in the questions or comments. If you've got any questions or comments, we'd be happy to talk to you guys. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.